Imagine this. You're on the 8:47 a.m. Red Line train heading into downtown Chicago during Monday morning rush hour. The subway car is packed with commuters, office workers scrolling through phones, students with backpacks, elderly passengers heading to medical appointments. Everyone is lost in their own world until the train suddenly screeches to a halt between stations. Then the conductor's panicked voice crackles over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an emergency situation. If there are any explosive ordnance disposal specialists on board, please identify yourselves immediately. Every head snaps up from their phones. Confusion spreads through the crowded car like wildfire. Explosive ordnance disposal? Why would a subway train need a bomb expert? But in the last car, a quiet man in his 50s slowly looks up from the newspaper he's been reading. He's wearing a simple maintenance worker's uniform with Chicago Transit Authority embroidered on the chest. To everyone around him, he's just another city employee heading to work. Nobody knew his real identity. Nobody knew what he was truly capable of. His name was Staff Sergeant Thomas Wire Kowalski, and he was about to change the fate of everyone on that train. What none of the 247 passengers realized was that the man they'd been ignoring was actually the most decorated bomb disposal expert in military history. A soldier who had defused over 3,000 explosive devices in Iraq and Afghanistan, who had walked through minefields that would have killed anyone else, who had saved entire cities from terrorist attacks. Thomas had been living in complete anonymity for 3 years, working as a subway maintenance technician under a false identity. He was hiding from a military career that had cost him his family, his sanity, and nearly his life. The man who had once been fearless around explosives now couldn't even handle fireworks on the 4th of July without having panic attacks. But when that conductor's desperate call echoed through the subway tunnel, something deep inside Thomas awakened against his will. He folded his newspaper carefully, took a deep breath that shook with 3 years of suppressed trauma, and stood up from his seat. Other passengers stared as he made his way toward the front of the train, their whispers following him. Is he really a bomb expert? Can some maintenance guy handle this? Ugin Thomas ignored them all, his jaw set with the grim determination that had once made him a legend among explosive ordnance disposal teams. When he reached the conductor's booth, what he found was worse than he had imagined. The train had stopped because sensors had detected multiple explosive devices hidden throughout the subway system, not just on their train but on 4 different trains currently carrying over 1,000 passengers through Chicago's underground tunnels. The devices were sophisticated, networked together, and set to detonate simultaneously at 9:15 a.m., exactly 28 minutes from now. "Who are you?" asked the conductor, a young man whose hands were shaking as he held the emergency radio. Thomas looked at the threat assessment report on the conductor's screen and immediately recognized the bomb signature. Staff Sergeant Thomas Kowalski, 89th Explosive Ordnance Disposal Company. I've seen this type of device before. The conductor's eyes widened. Your military? Thank God. The FBI says these bombs are too sophisticated for civilian bomb squads. They're calling in federal experts, but they won't get here for at least an hour. Thomas felt his stomach drop. We don't have an hour. If these devices are what I think they are, they're designed to bring down the entire tunnel system. We're talking about thousands of casualties and the complete destruction of Chicago's downtown transportation network. What Thomas didn't tell the conductor was that he recognized these bomb signatures because he had seen them before, in the worst day of his military career. 3 years ago, Thomas had been leading a bomb disposal team in Baghdad when they had encountered similar networked explosive devices. He had successfully defused 11 of the 12 bombs, saving hundreds of Iraqi civilians and American soldiers. But the 12th device had malfunctioned during his defusal attempt. The explosion had killed his 2 team members, Sergeant Maria Santos and Corporal David Chen, who had been standing just 10 feet away providing security. Thomas had survived with only minor injuries, but the guilt of losing his soldiers, his friends, had destroyed him from the inside. The official report had cleared him of any wrongdoing, calling him a hero for saving so many lives. But Thomas knew the truth. He had made a split-second decision during the defusal that had prioritized completing the mission over protecting his team. Maria and David had died because Thomas had chosen to keep working on the bomb instead of calling for evacuation when the timer started behaving erratically. Now, trapped in a Chicago subway tunnel with over 1,000 lives at stake, Thomas faced the same type of devices that had killed his friends and ended his military career. The conductor's radio crackled with an update from the FBI command center. All trains, be advised that we have confirmed 4 separate bombing locations: Red Line Car 7, Blue Line Car 3, Green Line Car 5, and Orange Line Car 2. Each device appears to be connected to a master trigger system. Any attempt to evacuate passengers could trigger premature detonation. Thomas closed his eyes and felt the familiar weight of impossible responsibilities settling on his shoulders. Each bomb would need to be defused manually, in sequence, by someone with the specialized training to recognize the trigger mechanisms. The devices were too sophisticated for remote disarmament, and any mistake would kill everyone in the tunnel system. But Thomas was the only person in Chicago with the training and experience to handle military-grade explosives of this complexity. And he would have to do it while battling the PTSD that had made him afraid of the very devices he had once mastered. "Sir," the conductor said quietly, "what do we do?" Thomas opened his eyes and looked through the train windows at the faces of passengers who had no idea they were sitting on top of enough explosives to level a city block. Children, elderly people, pregnant women, all depending on a broken soldier who hadn't defused a bomb in 3 years. "We save everyone," Thomas said, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded respect in the most dangerous situations on Earth. "But I'm going to need your help, and you're going to have to trust me completely." What Thomas attempted next had never been tried in civilian explosive ordnance disposal. He began moving through the train cars, using techniques he had developed for identifying and disarming networked explosive devices in urban warfare environments. His hands, which had shaken from PTSD for 3 years, became steady as steel when he touched the first bomb. The device was hidden beneath passenger seating, disguised as routine maintenance equipment. But Thomas could see the telltale signatures of military-grade explosives, timer systems that had been designed to defeat standard bomb disposal procedures, and trigger mechanisms that would detonate if disturbed incorrectly. "Everyone listen carefully," Thomas announced over the train's intercom system. "My name is Staff Sergeant Kowalski, U.S. Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal. There are bombs on this train, but I'm going to get everyone home safely. I need complete silence and absolute stillness while I work." The train car fell silent except for the sound of Thomas's breathing as he knelt beside the first explosive device. His training took over, pushing aside the trauma and fear that had paralyzed him for years. Thomas's hands moved with the precision that had made him legendary among bomb disposal experts, disconnecting wires, bypassing trigger mechanisms, and neutralizing components in a sequence that looked like a deadly dance. But this bomb was just the beginning. The devices were networked together through a communication system that Thomas recognized from his military service. Each bomb would need to be disarmed in a specific sequence, or the master trigger would detonate all remaining devices simultaneously. Thomas had 22 minutes to defuse 4 bombs on 4 different trains, scattered throughout the Chicago subway system, with no backup and no margin for error. He keyed his radio to the emergency frequency that connected all 4 trains. "This is Staff Sergeant Kowalski to all train operators. I'm going to guide you through identifying the explosive devices on your trains. Listen carefully and follow my instructions exactly." What happened next would be studied in bomb disposal schools for decades. Over the next 18 minutes, Thomas conducted a remote explosive ordnance disposal operation that combined his battlefield experience with an intimate knowledge of the subway system he had been maintaining for 3 years. He talked 4 civilian train operators through identifying and isolating bomb components while simultaneously working on the device in his own car. "Blue Line operator, the device under seat 23 has a mercury switch that will detonate if the train moves more than 6 inches in any direction. Whatever you do, don't let that train rock." "Green Line operator, I need you to locate the timer display. It should show a red digital countdown. Tell me exactly what numbers you see." "Orange Line operator, there's going to be a wire bundle connecting the device to the train's electrical system, and I need you to trace that connection, but don't touch anything until I tell you exactly which wire to cut." Each instruction Thomas gave was based on his experience with similar devices in combat zones, but he was applying military bomb disposal techniques to a civilian environment in ways that had never been attempted before. The most dangerous moment came when Thomas realized that the master trigger was located on his own train. With 8 minutes remaining on the countdown, Thomas discovered that the bomb in Car 7 wasn't just another network device, it was the central controller that coordinated. If he made any mistake while disarming it, all 4 bombs would detonate simultaneously. But the central controller also meant that if Thomas could successfully disable this device, he could prevent the detonation of all the other bombs without requiring the other train operators to complete their defusal procedures. Thomas stared at the most complex explosive device he had ever encountered, more sophisticated than anything he had seen in Iraq or Afghanistan. The bomb had multiple redundant trigger systems, anti-tampering devices that would detonate if approached incorrectly, and a timer that was counting down with mechanical precision. With 6 minutes left, Thomas made a decision that went against every protocol in military bomb disposal. He was going to attempt a procedure that existed only in theoretical manuals, something so dangerous that it was considered suicidal even by explosive ordnance disposal standards. He was going to perform a hot wire bypass, disconnecting the master trigger while every movement had to be perfect. One mistake would kill over 1,000 people and destroy several city blocks of downtown Chicago. The subway car was completely silent except for the mechanical ticking of the countdown timer. 4:23, 4:22, 4:21. Thomas isolated the master control circuit, identified the primary trigger mechanism, and began the most delicate procedure of his career. He had to disconnect the timer from the detonator while maintaining electrical continuity through a bypass circuit that would fool the bomb's anti-tampering sensors. With 2 minutes and 17 seconds remaining, Thomas completed the bypass. The timer continued counting down, but it was no longer connected to the explosive devices. Thomas had essentially performed surgery on a live bomb, removing its ability to kill while leaving its brain functioning normally. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the timer reached 0. Nothing happened. The silence that followed was broken by an explosion of cheers, crying, and applause from passengers who realized they were still alive. Thomas slumped back against the train wall, physically and emotionally exhausted. His radio crackled with reports from the other trains. Blue line, all clear. Green line, passengers safe. And orange line, devices neutralized. Thomas had saved over 1,000 lives using techniques that would revolutionize urban bomb disposal procedures worldwide. But when the FBI arrived and began interviewing passengers about the incident, they couldn't find Staff Sergeant Thomas Kowalski anywhere. He had quietly slipped away during the evacuation, disappearing back into the anonymity he had maintained for 3 years. The only evidence of his involvement was the sophisticated bomb disposal work that civilian experts said was impossible for anyone except a military specialist with decades of experience. The media dubbed him the Ghost of Car 7, the mysterious hero who had saved Chicago's subway system and then vanished without seeking recognition or reward. But Thomas didn't disappear entirely. 3 months later, reports began surfacing of a new instructor at the Chicago Police Department's bomb disposal training facility. The instructor never gave his full name, just went by Wire, and taught techniques that weren't found in any civilian manual. His classes became legendary among law enforcement, training bomb disposal experts in methods that had been developed for military combat but adapted for urban civilian environments. Students came from police departments across the country to learn from the instructor who could teach them to handle explosive devices that traditional training couldn't address. But the instructor's most important innovation wasn't his technical knowledge, it was his approach to helping bomb disposal experts deal with the psychological trauma that came with the job. "Every bomb you defuse saves lives," Wire would tell his students. "But every bomb that haunts you afterward is a reminder that you chose to serve others despite your own fears. The trauma isn't a weakness. It's proof that you understand the weight of the responsibility you carry." Thomas had learned that running from trauma doesn't heal it, but using that traumatic experience to serve others can transform pain into purpose. 5 years after the subway incident, Chicago's bomb disposal unit had become the most effective urban explosive ordnance disposal team in the country. Their techniques had been adopted by major cities worldwide, and their psychological support programs had reduced PTSD rates among bomb disposal experts by 60%. But the instructor, known as Wire, remained a mystery to everyone except his students, who knew him as the man who had taught them that heroes don't seek recognition. They just show up when people need saving. Today, Thomas Kowalski still works in Chicago's subway system, but not as a maintenance technician. He serves as the emergency response. His office is located in the same tunnel where he once defused 4 bombs with 6 minutes to spare, and he keeps on his desk a photo of Sergeant Maria Santos and Corporal David Chen, the friends whose deaths had driven him into hiding but whose memory had ultimately guided him back to serving others. The photo has an inscription that Thomas reads every morning. "They died so others could live. I live so others don't have to die." Thomas learned that the greatest way to honor those you couldn't save is to dedicate your life to saving those you can. When passengers ride Chicago's subway system today, they have no idea that their safety is protected by a man who once lost everything but found his way back to purpose through service to others. Sometimes the most broken among us become the most powerful protectors. Sometimes the people who are most afraid of their own capabilities are exactly the ones who need to use those capabilities to serve others. The conductor in Car 7 reminded us all that heroes don't announce themselves with fanfare. They quietly board the train of life, sit in the back, and wait for the moment when their skills and courage are needed most. Thomas Kowalski proved that redemption isn't about forgetting your failures, it's about using them to ensure that others don't have to experience the same pain. And sometimes the person sitting quietly in the corner, wearing a maintenance uniform and reading a newspaper, sometimes the most ordinary-looking person next to you is actually an extraordinary hero waiting for their moment to serve. Don't forget to like, share this story with someone who needs to know that heroes are everywhere, and subscribe for more powerful stories about the hidden guardians who keep us safe every day.